Hello, CIT 261. This is Sarah here with another sharing video. Today I am going to show you my Ajax code using a JSON file that I created for my local storage code, and I'm going to walk you through it. So let me start by sharing my screen. So I actually went and I modified the example Ajax that Brother James posted. And this is what it looks like on my site. I had created a JSON file with the prophets of the church, listing their first name, their last name, the years that they served as prophet, and which century. So as you can see, I have some instructions up here. I have a view button, and I have a button that clears local storage. So let's click on view, and it populates the JSON file. So here we have all of the prophets of the church, and when I hover over their names, they wiggle. I have their years served, and then I have the century. So let's see what happens when I hover over the 19th century. All of the prophets who served in the 19th century will highlight, 20th century, and then 21st. To delete a prophet from the list, let's delete Joseph Smith just because he's on top. You click on his name, and he's been deleted. Brigham Young, deleted. And if I want to undo that, because that's been sent to local storage, it hasn't truly been deleted, I can clear local storage, and the local storage is now empty. And I can reload the page, repopulate the list. That'll swing back in there, and you can see Joseph and Brigham are back where they belong. So let's take a look at the code. I'm going to start here with the HTML. You can see we've got the buttons, and they go to an on-click for get JSON and an on-click for clear LS. So let's take a look at get JSON first. It starts with an XML HTTP request, and all Ajax starts with that. And what that does is it starts a request to get the JSON file that will populate the Ajax from the server. So we saved that in the variable XML HTTP, and this is the JSON file that we'll be using, which I've named ajax.json, and we've given that the variable URL. So within this function, we have a subfunction, and it says that if the ready state equals 4, which means that it's ready to go and it works, and the status equals 200, which means that it does load properly. And there are other numbers. It goes from 0 to 4, and it's either 200 or 400. But those are the ones that you need for it to actually load. So this is saying that if the page loads and the information loads in, then we will go on to function build table, and it will take that request and put it in text form. And down here we have the open, and we want to use get and not post. We want the URL, and we want it to be true. And by doing true, it allows us to run other parts of the script, other functions, so we don't have to wait for the server to fully load in that before we run other parts of our script, which is really useful. It speeds up the process, and it's a great help to us. And then we send. So let's take a look at build table, because that is the next part of our function. So we build a table from the response from this function, and we put it in the div up there inside the inner HTML. We use json.parse for the response to stringify it, and we build a table with the prophet name, the year served, and the century. We use a for loop to cycle through the prophets, and then we can go and we can attach these other functions. So for instance, this has an on-click that leads us to the delete prophet function, which is a little farther down, and it attaches the class WiggleMe when we hover over it, and it will put in profits I, and we use I instead of an index number because we don't know exactly how many profits there are going to be on the list since that's changing. That's why we have to loop through, and the first name and their last name. We do the same thing for the years, and we add a class that puts in that fun sliding text function, and then we do the highlight century function, which we'll scroll down and look at, for mouse over on the century. And then, oops, that should be the profit, not student record. I forgot to edit that comment, but we can then save it to local storage. And that was if we had wanted to add a profit, but in this case, there are no more profits to add. But I thought I would leave it in there just because it's nice to have local storage as an option to kind of show that if you wanted to refresh the page and you hadn't saved it, you could see the results. So again, this is just like any other local storage. You set the item, the first name and the last name, and you stringify it. And if it doesn't work, if it does work, it sets it to local storage. If it doesn't work, you get a message that tells you that your browser does not support local storage. And the end of that is closing the table. And there we go. And so let's look down at the functions that will happen to the individual cells of the table, or rather, sorry, the individual columns and the items within those cells. So highlight century. Century is going to be the objects inside, and for any row that has the same century, so we're going to be going by nodes, the ones that have the same value of century from the JSON table. That was the value that we used to assign the century, either 19th, 20th, or 21st. It's going to highlight them, and it'll do that by giving them a new class name and setting that class. And then we're going to look at delete profit, which you can do by clicking on a profit. That's an on-click function. So that deals with local storage. And we're going to get that item from local storage, put it through a JSON parse, and set it as a variable table item. And set that as another variable I after finding the object from the parent node in the row index. And we are going to then take I and allow it to be deleted from the document by going by the ID profit list. That's what is up there if we scroll up to the top. And we use local storage to remove the item from the inner text of div. So let's take a look at the clear local storage function. It's pretty easy. It's local storage.clear and does the same thing. And it pops up a little message, tells you local storage is now empty. So as you can see, they all feed back into build table, which feeds back into get JSON, which feeds back into the buttons. Now let's take a look at the CSS. So the dot highlight, that's pretty easy. It just changes the background color to this blue. The sliding text is in animation, and that's pretty easy. It's 3 seconds and an ease, and it goes forwards. So that tells you what direction it's going in and how it's moving and how long it needs to go. And then for wiggle knee, that is also an animation. And it has, as you can see, the keyframes going at 0, 25, 75, and 100. And it tells you how long it's going to go for. And that is 0.3 seconds. and it's going to be an iteration of 2, so it's not going to keep going over and over. And basically what each frame is doing is rotating and scaling and skewing and translating. It's moving just a little bit each time, over and over and over 4 times, so that it gets that kind of wiggle effect. So that is everything. I hope I did a good enough job of explaining it. It was really fun to take Brother James's base code and apply it to a JSON file that I had already made for a different part of my portfolio. And thanks for watching. I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of the semester.